So obviously quite a big topic that we're addressing today. I find personally that the projections into the future is very, very difficult to come to a base of understanding because of how incredibly complex these kind of things are. To be able to project into the future, the amount of information that we need to know to do that is wider than any one person could possibly hope to comprehend. And so therefore, when I'm thinking in myself about climate change and what the implications of it are, where I tend to put my attention is what is happening right now. And in terms of the thinking about in terms of the future, that's where we can use these projections when we're wanting to engage with planning ahead. So for example, thank you so much, Sam, for bringing us all this into the work that you've done to integrate these projections into the interdependence model, which is, I think, an incredible source of hope and an excellent example of human ingenuity, of saying, okay, something's not working, we're going to use what information we have, make these predictions, and then find a potential route through this. But in terms of, for us personally, I find that it's the most effective thing is to just look around and actually just see, okay, what is happening? So I'm just going to run through, not going into too much detail, but just kind of a bit of a kind of summary of what is happening around the world. So we, as the human race, have been responsible for cutting down half of the world's forests. Obviously in this country we can see that, this was a forested country, but the kind of deforestation of around the equatorial belt, it accounts for a lot of that also. So we've currently estimated to cut down 20% of the Amazon rainforest, and another 20% has been strongly affected. I don't think we need to really mention the impact that has on the species of life that we find there. So each year we are currently putting 8 million tonnes of plastic into the ocean. Of course, this causes unimaginable destruction to sea life, ocean acidification. Between California and Hawaii is an island of plastic 3 times the size of France. The coral reefs are the most diverse area of wildlife on the planet, even more than the rainforest in terms of per cubic metre. And the bleaching that's happening due to sea level rising, but also through the poisoning of the ocean, is having a massive impact on the food chain in the oceans. Our agricultural practices are effective for making large amounts of food, but soon apart from that, they're just a nightmare. The use of insecticides and pesticides and fertilizers. So insecticides and pesticides, I mean, you're just putting poison on the ground. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really. Not really much more to say about that. Obviously, some of that poison is going to us in our food, but a huge amount of that is running off into water supplies and, of course, affecting the land that it's sprayed on. At 70 to 80% decline in insect life, the continual use of insecticides and pesticides is, from what I can see, just one of the most stupid things we could possibly do. However, it's not as simple as that. Monocropping is the current agricultural system, so you can't do monocropping without using insecticides and pesticides because monocropping is not a natural phenomenon. You don't find that anywhere. And the balance, the harmony within nature that takes care of these sorts of things is missing. So that's why that's used. This is one that never really gets mentioned, but currently 58,000 of the largest rivers in the world have been dammed, quite often under the guise of green technology, that we're creating energy, water, What we're actually doing is drying up wetlands, which are the largest, the most effective natural carbon sequesters, as well as interfering with fish and river animals, their breeding routes and their life cycles, as well as, of course, flooding large areas of mountainous terrain. So in 2018, we released 37 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is a record high. So despite the long time that we've known about this, we're still merrily chugging away. There's another element to this, which is also not often mentioned, is the air pollution for us. So we now know that 9 out of 10 people breathe polluted air, and this kills around 7 million people every year. So 1/3 of deaths from stroke, lung cancer and heart disease are due to air pollution. So not only are we causing this greenhouse gas, but we're also just poisoning ourselves constantly. And we've mentioned about extinction, so extinction rates are 10,000 times higher than how they would be before the Industrial Revolution. Just like, take a second to just feel that, I reckon. So what does this, we can see what this is doing to the world, to a point, but what's this doing for us? How do we feel about this in terms of not just personally but also culturally? Because even though we're thinking maybe more consciously about this, how does this affect people around the world who maybe aren't on the same level of wanting to be involved? So in the UK, someone commits suicide on average every 20 minutes, increasingly in young people. So depression and mental illness are at an all-time high. This could be seen as a mental health issue, also relating to a social issue, in some cases a spiritual issue, and really what I believe and I think is a good way to see this is that environmental issues, social issues, spiritual issues, mental health issues, they're all just the same thing. Actually separating them isn't helpful. It's all actually, we're in this situation, we've got a culture that is working in a particular way, and the results of it are in different areas, they're not separate. This one I wanted to put in because it really gets me, but it's considered normal for children as young as 7 to 12 years old to be medicated for symptoms of ADHD, which is basically symptoms such as having trouble concentrating in a classroom. A 7-year-old not being able to concentrate in a classroom is given Ritalin for this. I could go more into that, but I don't think I need to actually. So, this is a pretty dire story. All of what we've kind of been going through today, it's a really dark story. And in order to talk about how to relate to this story, how to work with this story, how to still live and thrive and be happy with this story, we need to start looking at how we as a culture, how our culture is set up to deal with complex issues. And how our culture currently deals with complex issues is it has a little kind of pattern that it tends to follow, which is that we split into different groups that then argue with each other. Now I'm really going into Charles Eisenstein's take on this. So in his book Climate and Story, I really very much recommend that as a kind of top on the reading list. Because if we are planning to act, then we have to basically, first of all, come to terms with the fact that our culture isn't very good at acting with issues such as this. So what happens is that a polarization occurs. So in this case, it's the climate denialists and the climate alarmists, and they kind of promptly have begun arguing with each other about the details, really. Even a lot of the climate denialists actually still agree that we're in this problem, but it's easier to argue with someone else's opinion than to actually absorb what needs to be absorbed and make changes. And this fits into this idea of war mentality. And our culture has been geared towards war mentality for a really long time because it's pretty convenient. When you're in an emergency situation, you're able to make decisions that you can kind of say, I wouldn't normally do this, but we're in this dangerous situation, therefore I'm just going to do this anyway. And, so there's a lot of examples of this pattern that comes through. So, you could look at terrorism. So we have this situation where there are terrorists, there are people who want to blow themselves up in public places, and what our culture does to address that is to say, right, these guys are evil and we're going to kill them. As opposed to saying, why are there people who want to do this? What maybe are we doing that is contributing to this situation? So it's not like, oh, maybe we should stop bombing them or taking all the oil under the ground and leaving them homeless. That's quite a difficult topic to go towards. So we just go, evil terrorists, let's destroy them. Drugs, like the war on drugs, war mentality, polarization. Instead of going, why are people addicted to drugs? It's how can we best arrest and incarcerate as many drug dealers and drug takers as possible. And of course, this doesn't actually help anyone. This just makes the situation worse. It ends up being that people who choose to take drugs end up kind of pushed to the side of society and then get into they say gateway drugs or whatever. That we create this situation. And there's tons more examples of this kind of pattern. So if we're in this situation where polarization is occurring, we need to start thinking about how do we change the game? So Einstein came up with this great comment which says, if something's not working, you can't move forward using the same way of thinking. So you can't use an old way of thinking to change an old idea. You have to sort of think outside of the box. So really, what makes sense to me from what I've read, and a lot of different very wise people, in my opinion, talk about this, is about finding a more of like a middle ground. It's just like, if it's easy, and I've overheard some conversations about talking to people about climate change, and then you just want to throw all of the kind of the worst stuff at them and say, no, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And actually, one way around this could be to actually just really listen to what that person's trying to say. Really just say, okay, yeah, what's your opinion? I want to hear you. And then see what emerges from that place of receptivity. Because then what you're doing is you're stepping out of war mentality. You're not putting yourself in a position where you're making them wrong or you're attacking them. You're actually putting them in a position where they're opening up a conversation. So in Charles Eisenstein's book, the first couple of chapters, he basically spends a lot of time going into the climate denialists sort of meetings and groups and gatherings and just really hearing what they're saying. Within a couple of months, the amount of information they have that supports all of their opinions, he starts to go, oh my god, this is just a con. Like, this whole climate change thing is not real, it's just a con. Then he goes into the climate alarmists camp, listens to all of them, and they're like, god, they're climate denialists, they're crazy, that's a con. And so then it comes out and you're going, well, hang on a second, okay, what's going on here? If both people have got all the evidence to back them up, and both sides seem to be like reasonable, intelligent people. It's not like it's just like a load of goblins out there saying this is all a load of rubbish. It's just human beings. So they're both reasonable, they're both intelligent. So clearly there's something being missed here. So the way I see it is that when you go on one side of the fence, what you end up doing is collecting a select set of information. You come up with a story that is actually half of the story. So I had a personal experience of this while I was really out there in the deep adaptation kind of world. I was hearing the statistic again and again and again that we import 60% of our food in the UK, and therefore if there was a catastrophe, 60% of our population would die like that. And it was only months later that I found out that we export the equivalent of 40% of food. And so that was just for me a really good example of like how when you've got an idea and you've set yourself on that idea, you naturally accumulate the evidence to support that idea, and actually you end up missing things. So being as open as possible to different people's point of view means that we get a more rounded picture. So I'd like to just take us through some of these, so just seeing these slides, deforestation, plastic, terrible agricultural practice. So I'd like to just show that there's a bit of another side of the story, and actually that it's really helpful, even if we're still recognising the emergency and the urgency of the situation, to just like broaden our minds to think of the other side as well. So this is where a new story comes from. So this is a Brazilian couple, and he was a journalist and was travelling around the world, came back home after many years abroad and found the area where he grew up totally devastated from agricultural practices there. And so him and his wife planted 2.7 million trees, I believe, in 20 years. And this is what they accomplished. This is just one couple. But this project in itself actually inspired a huge amount of attention. So they wanted their project to be a beacon of hope and inspiration for their sustainability. And so by December 2012, over 700 educational projects had been developed, and 65,000 people, they estimated, had gone through their little place in Minas Gerais, Brazil, to learn about how you can move forest and have it wild. And this is one example. Some of my neighbours where I live in Devon, and some other friends down in Cornwall, they've got these reforestation projects of their own, and there's just two people I happen to know. Around the world, all over the world, people are waking up to the fact that we need trees, and therefore planting trees. So it's like we deforested from a place of ignorance, and then what that has led to is a realization, an awakening of the actual necessity for trees and wild land. So that is now happening all over the world. So the plastic story, all over the world, people are cleaning beaches. It's because of the scale of the plastic problem. This can seem just like a little thing to forget about, but actually I think that's extraordinary. That people all over the world are spending their time, not charging any money, spending their free time going and picking up plastic from beaches to clean this. And technologically, there's huge advancement in the designs for these kinds of machines which can clean up millions of tons of plastic in one go, and they're now being deployed. So we have these issues and we're addressing them. So the agricultural story is horrific, but it's now been documented and shown that with regenerative agriculture, as it's known, also older systems like permaculture, we can in fact create enough food to feed ourselves in a way that is in balance with nature. So these solutions exist, and they are already being implemented all over the world by people like you and I who just go, actually, you know what, I don't want to go to the supermarket to buy my food, I want to grow it myself. And that also addresses a huge amount of other issues in terms of, it's been coined nature deficit disorder, but basically so much of the anxiety, depression, mental health issues are proven without a doubt to be massively helped by time in nature. So actually going outside and spending an hour a day growing your own food is an incredible solution, both to the mental health issues, the epidemic that we're actually facing, and also, of course, the environmental issues, because when you're using these regenerative practices, you're bringing health to the ecosystems of your area, which shouldn't be undermined, because local action that's then spread is, in my opinion, the way that we're going to make this change.
Joseph, could I add something that gave me hope from the paper? The Bendog paper was this idea that because there's a higher concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, plants grow faster, and is it bigger than what they grow? The rate at which they grow is faster. So a little bit of hope there. That,
Thank you. And that's one example of many. So it's a bit backwards because we have positive reinforcement loops, which are actually the bad ones, if you like, because they're the ones that grow. And then you have negative, or as we call it, self-correcting feedback systems. So unknown to us, for sure, there are so many feedback systems and ones that we know about that are actually, it's like a stasis. It needs to create equilibrium. So, for example, the more water that is melted creates more cloud cover. The more water in the system, the hotter the sun is, also the more cloud cover comes up, which has this reflective quality, to mention another one. And you're absolutely right, the more carbon there is in the atmosphere, that's great for plants. Warmer conditions and more carbon, they're like fantastic. Of course, if they catch fire, that's a different story. But but like there has actually been a massive boom of greening around the world, which has lessened the effects that we would have imagined. So it can go both ways, absolutely.
Sorry, can I add to that though? Because obviously, like they're able to photosynthesize more with more carbon, but they respire less, and photosynthesis is the means by which they produce sugar as their own energy. And so there's a much higher concentration of carbohydrates in all plants worldwide since carbon levels have risen, which make them much worse for things that feed on them, including ourselves. And I think a range of key vitamins and minerals like vitamin C, zinc, potassium, and a few others have declined in crops by about a third since 1950 because carbon levels have risen, meaning that more sugar is produced and less of everything else.
Interesting. I wonder if it's also because of the other ways we've been screwing with the crops as well, like we basically made them, we genetically engineered them, haven't we? And we, kind of
It's bright and colourful and big and beautiful.
And it's so unnatural, isn't it? Like, but maybe that's true. I mean, you're right. There's so many things like problems as well, but maybe there are also glimmers of
yeah, I mean, it's
like
if we took in loads of sugar, we'd get pretty big. But like, we wouldn't be healthy.
Well, we could capture some carbon.
Without
getting big, right?
There's so many threads that we could follow here. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I think what is a helpful thing to bring in as well is to kind of come back to this idea of story and how that we have these different stories and where they're leading. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is just take you through some of the cultural stories, some of them that we experience currently and where they might be going, and also maybe some of the older ones that have already changed. So there's this idea of evolution in story as well, so that our kind of impression on what's happening can also be changing as well as life evolves. So I'm just going to come through a few different stories. So this is one that our culture still embraces, but what we find is that this less and less is kind of believed. So it's like the story is still very much in process. Like, the economy needs to grow is kind of held, but like this thing about at any cost, starting to find people aren't really buying that anymore. So and what we're hearing more is how perhaps it's unacceptable to degrade the earth and its inhabitants for economic growth, and actually this sort of story is the one that's gaining momentum now. So another example. So this one is more, I think, an unconscious story in general, that we just naturally tend to believe in our culture that the richer you are, the happier you are. And it's an interesting one to really find out that actually, and I'm excluding people who are in starvation and the kind of poverty that is they don't have their basic needs met here, but in terms of kind of above that line, actually some of the most unhappy people you find are the people at the very top. As an example. I don't know if I should put it that way too. And the idea being that, we've had, so Homo sapiens themselves, we've been around here 140,000 years, more or less, and we've evolved out creatures that go back a lot longer than that, and always we've had quite a similar way of living. We've been in nature, we've been needing to use our bodies and our minds for problem solving, and this whole kind of thing about amassing a huge amount of wealth and then having that sort of step back from the natural world and the ways that we've actually evolved to use our bodies and our minds, we find that there's actually a huge amount of depression and a huge amount of apathy and lack of fulfillment. So perhaps a newer story is the happiness and fulfillment unrelated to material wealth. So I decided to use this picture of these guys because I actually know these guys. They live in Mexico. This one is called Ticari, and she's called Rosa. And they're the happiest people I've ever met. And their lifestyle is that they live in Mexico and they walk from village to village, and they're kind of like medicine men. They go around, as a man and woman, they go around and they perform healings on people, and basically they have absolutely no material wealth. Their material wealth is in their brightly coloured clothing and the artifacts that they make with their hands. So in terms of how we would consider these people to be some of the most poorest people in the world, in the sense of they have no material wealth, they barely have and they've got a little home somewhere, it's just like a little shack. And yet, their happiness and fulfillment is like nothing I've ever seen. You just walk into a room and you immediately feel happy. So it's this kind of unhooking money from happiness.
Can I,
Please.
I hear always say people say, yeah, the wealthiest people around, there's people, and I'm not sure that's necessarily true, although I would say the wealthiest people are not necessarily happier. Is that the way to put it? I think what is interesting about wealth is that it's linked to security, and that's what's really important, is like security and purpose. So I think that this is the unfortunate thing, is like, yeah, wealth is kind of linked to security.
Sure. Just add one thing to that. There's a really great book called Affluenza that we spoke about last week, and as anthropologists spread around the world, really doing a study of affluence to try and sort of bring it out. And yeah, I mean, essentially it's the same point. It's not necessarily the money itself, it's other things like community. You know, are you respected by the group? Do you have purpose in your life that really lead to well-being, let's say.
Great. So this is, I think now we're jumping. So this is an old story. Just in case you can't see it, so someone with a different background, blood, skin, colour, beliefs can be treated as less than an animal, tortured, enslaved, and killed at a superior's whim. So this is a picture from the Holocaust, but there's many examples, the slave trade, whatever. You can go back as far as you like as well, because in ancient cultures there was also this. It's actually a very recent phenomenon, and there are with some examples and some exceptions where we don't go by this actually. In most ancient cultures, slavery was a pretty common occurrence. So how this has evolved to, I think, our kind of cultural story now looks more like this. So with the Roman statue and with the, we've said it's not okay to practice genocide or war crimes or crimes of aggression. It's not okay to treat people with cruelty. This hasn't been implemented. I don't think this has been implemented around the world. But in terms of the story, I think in our culture this is a more kind of politically correct, socially acceptable with this Overton window. But that is the story, and I think that has an effect which takes time to develop. So I think that where this story is evolving to looks more like this. So all around the world there are projects in the political realm, in the private realm, in all different kinds of ways, and in the legal realm where people are trying to implement the rights of nature. So I recently, having been looking into the work of Polly Higgins before she died, was amazed to discover that, so the Rome statute came in, I believe, in '96, and with some 10 or 11 years before that of negotiating and fine-tuning, and I only found out that at the very, very last minute a law was removed from the Rome statute that would have gone through, and that law is ecocide. So in '96, at the very 11th hour, they pulled this law out, and there were 4 countries that lobbied for this to be removed. So there were 54 countries in total. 50 had agreed that they would put ecocide as one of the kind of core international criminal laws, and the countries were, of course, England, the United States, France, and the Netherlands. The Netherlands often puts a surprise, but it's some of the largest income in the Netherlands is with fossil fuel companies. It's another state. So there is work all over the world currently to try and put this law in place for rights of nature. In some countries, Ecuador was the first country to implement the rights of nature, which was meant to be that in order to harm nature, you had to go through a kind of court process. Unfortunately, Rafael Correa, who was the president of Ecuador, and still is, came in with this, and then within a couple of years, it sold most of the rainforest to China for oil development. So it wasn't maintained, but it was still a good step. So, things take some time to build. So this is an example of the polarization that we're talking about. So this kind of story, it's a polarized story, it's a politically hot or a personally hot issue, so you get this polarization. So it tends to be that people either go down the road like, oh no, it's completely fine, or the world's about to end. And the story that I've been kind of exploring and tuning in with and working with looks more like this. So all of these issues, whether it's environmental or social or spiritual or anything else, it's to kind of see that the way we've been living doesn't make sense. It's kind of no-brainer. We all know that. We know that there are things all over the world that just don't make sense. And one way to frame the time where we're in is to say that we are in the largest grassroots movement that has ever been in human terms. I imagine grass have probably got more roots than anyway. So, discounting actual grassroots, I think that it's fair to say that the environmental, social, spiritual uprising, which we're just starting to see the tiniest glimmers of, which has been under the surface for, I don't know, certainly since the 60s, but I'm sure in smaller ways since way before that, has been just slowly growing under the surface. And I think of it like a wave. A wave starts way out to sea, and all you can see is just this tiny little ripple. And then at the point when it starts to kind of come up, at the point where you start to see it, it's already the end game. And I believe that we are in this time now. The fact that whole countries are starting to declare climate emergency and starting to look at these issues, to me, shows that this shift is going to come quickly now. And there's an interesting, again, this is a Bell diagram in Extinction Rebellion have kind of based a lot of their work on this, which is that to make a social change, you actually don't need very many people. It's a massive minority of people that you need to be on board with something. I think they say like 2.7%, 3.4 between this line. There's this
3.5.
Yeah, 3.5. Yeah. So that, and actually the work is in that cusp. It's the early adopters. So what's the word?
Innovators.
Thank you. Innovators into the early adopters. And actually, when you hit that point, the changes come very, very quickly. The fact that we're having this conversation here, the fact that we're doing this, this is happening all over the world. This is happening in places that you couldn't possibly imagine. I saw a presentation of someone who had a list of different organisations working towards environmental and social justice and etc. And it was like a PowerPoint rolling. He said that this is just the ones they had managed to collect, and they could have that video rolling for a month, and it still wouldn't have got to the end. So it's this idea that the amount of people who off their own back have started to work towards exactly the same things around the world is unprecedented. So even, the youth strike movement, the other month they had 2 million young people around the world striking from schools and working towards that. I've been involved in the youth strike movement in London and in Devon, and I can tell you they are not doing it to try and get a day of school. Actually, they had as many people on the Easter holidays at their strikes. So, the fact that the young people are rising at this time, I also think is a sure sign that these changes are coming. And so it's really like talking about this. It said we can look at a story one way, and we can look at a story another way, and there's no right or wrong here. It doesn't saying that we're in this time of great change doesn't take away from the fact that we're also in this time of great danger. And actually, when we look back through the evolution story, through the time, through the story we had this morning, it's actually the times with the most danger. It's the times when things look impossible that it gets interesting. It's like, that first fish to crawl out of the sea. Who'd have thought, if you just saw an image of this ocean drying up and these fish there, it's a disaster, it's a catastrophe, they're going to die, there's no hope. Absolutely no hope. And yet, that's when it gets interesting. And this is shown again and again and again and again. It is adversity that creates development, that creates progress. The idea that life should be easy, I think, is a relatively new idea that we have in our culture. It's like, if something's hard, don't do it. Actually, that's the opposite. That's the exact opposite way that life works. Animals competing with each other is what drives the diversity, the progress forward.
It's always darkest just before the dawn.
Exactly. And actually, looking at whilst we're also talking about stories, is to look at the stories that we tell ourselves, whether in Hollywood or whether in this kind of ancient mythology. It follows this pattern. You know, it's the point when there's absolutely no hope and the end is certain. That's when the change happens, and we tell ourselves the story in a million different ways constantly. That it's like this kind of the hero awakens at the last minute and manages it all against all the odds. And we indoctrinate ourselves with the story again and again and again. So it's not surprising that it's the point when the adversity seems at its worst that actually it's the time to not just give up. It's the time to go for it. And I just use the word hope, and hope is a bit of a controversial word these days, it seems. And actually, even in ancient Buddhist traditions, teachings, they say hope must die.
Mm.
And for me, I think of it as there's a difference. Because hope is, in essence, passive. It's, I believe that it's going to be okay. So then, what to do with that? Where I see to go with that, and this is also the work of Joanna Macy, she talks about active hope. And when she actually explains what she means by that is that she's using another concept, which is intention. And intention is very different from hope, because intention is, perhaps it's like we're not getting, perhaps I don't see that it's going to work. I don't have any hope. It looks impossible, but actually I'm going to find my target, even if it's hopeless, and I'm going to go for it anyway. That's intention, or as she calls it, active hope. And I think that this is now the time for active hope. This is not the time to get lost in despair. This is the time to wake up and say, I want this change. I want to see a world that I can be proud of.
Courage, yeah.
It takes courage. It takes real courage. So, from these slides as well, I think it's fair to say we have entered a time between stories. So there's a cultural story which has been rolling a long time and has led to us to where we are. And we have the feeling, we have the kind of taste on the breeze of this new story arising. We can start to see its threads, but actually we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know how that's going to develop. We're not yet in a new way of thinking. We're not yet in a new paradigm. And I believe there are people who are working on the level of the new paradigm. And Charles Eisenstein, Joanna Macy, Brian Swim, these people are good examples of that. And actually, I'd like to just, to give you a break from my voice, pass you over to Charles Eisenstein. So if I could ask.